Hello and welcome to this video. The woman's path to motorsport is paved with forgotten heroes and groundbreaking drivers who changed the landscape of racing only to be lost in the depths of history soon after. Eliska Junkova, perhaps the most successful Czech Grand Prix driver you never heard of, is one of those women. Without disrespect to your family, if you are watching this, most probably you are a racing fan. So, meet the grandmother you always wanted to have. Yes, this charming old lady has been a pioneer racer. She raced my favorite car of all time, the Bugatti Type 35, and has some amazing stories to tell. During her short motor racing career, she dared to compete against the great champions of the golden era of Grand Prix racing. She raced Bugattis, was the first woman to ever win a Grand Prix race, beating all men in her class in 1927, and did it in the new Nurburgring circuit, and with a lap record, so she was a Czech national hero. She was the darling of the Bugatti factory. Ettore Bugatti was stunned when she showed up without her banker husband Junek to have some work done on the 1922 Grand Prix car she had modified for hill climbs. Having driven the 378 miles from Prague to Molsheim by herself in a rainstorm, he asked, "Where is your mechanic?" And she replied, "He's at home. I drove myself." Her first Targa Florio was in 1927, and she invented the now common practice of walking a course and mapping it out. Yes, she walked the 108 kilometers course with her husband. Her first practice run was a mere 30 minutes slower than the fastest lap of the 1926 race. She remembers Emilio Matarassi, the Bugatti factory driver, taunted her diminutive physique, and how she flaunted her superior intelligence in his face.
Matarassi was the winner of the Targa Florio 27 and a very strong driver. And he came to me when I was there several days on the circuit and said, "Con questo non ci farà niente. With this, you won't do nothing here." I said, "Questo non importante, ma quello."
She crashed out of the race on the last lap when she had a good chance to win. The official reason? Faulty steering. She always claimed that, and I quote, "It was sabotage. They put a rock inside a turn just before I came through." End quote. She returned to Sicily in 1928 and displayed her greatest drive, beating many established male drivers. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Elizabeth Junek, the best lady racer of all time. She drove in the worst ever conditions for a Grand Prix racer, and she was winning, beating the men. She did it in a time when your first crash was, most of the times, the last one too, as it was deadly. Her husband died on her side in a crash during a race in the Nurburgring, and she stopped racing that same day. Regarded as one of the greatest female drivers in Grand Prix motor racing history, however, with communist rule in Czechoslovakia, she was largely forgotten by the motor racing until recently. Are you ready for this truly amazing story? This is Amazing Racing Stories. Episode 6. Elizabeth Junek. Born Alzbeta Pospielova, the daughter of a blacksmith, used the name Eliska Junkova and was from the town of Olomouc in Moravia. From an early age, the slight girl, nicknamed Smisek for her ever-present smile, dreamt of traveling the world. She loved to study foreign languages and by the age of 16 spoke fluent German and passable English. Skills which helped her land a job in the Olomouc branch of a mortgage bank after high school. It was in the Olomouc Bank that she met Vincent Junek, an ambitious young man who had been discharged from the army after being shot in the hand and was then getting the branch up and running. The two apparently didn't like each other at first. Both were stubborn and independent and clashed quite often. But once their tensions died down, the two fell for each other. So much so that Junek took Eliska along when he opened a new branch of his bank in Brno, then to Prague. In Brno, Eliska began formally studying foreign languages. Over the next 6 months, romance also began to blossom, and Eliska again followed Junek when he was reassigned to Prague. There, she sat for the state exams in English and began studying French. Her plan was to see the deserts of North Africa and then head for Ceylon, today known as Sri Lanka. Junek came to meet his beloved Eliska in Paris, but not under the Eiffel Tower. After a long separation, they met in an auto salon. Junek had done well for himself during the early years of the Czechoslovak First Republic, and by 1921 he was sufficiently wealthy to indulge his passion for fast cars. It didn't take much persuading to convince Eliska that cars could be her passion too. They offered the speed and exhilaration of travel, but without all the pesky laws and visas. Eliska Yunkova later recalled thinking, "If he is going to be the love of my life, then I better learn to love these damned engines." But before long she too became in love with the beauty of the racing cars on show, especially the Italian-designed, French-made Bugattis. On returning to Prague, she took driving courses in secret and got her driver's license. Meanwhile, Junek had started racing in earnest. In 1922, he won the Zbraslav Joloviste race, now Europe's old uphill course, and finally married his Eliska. Before long, the Juneks began competing in local racing events as a husband and wife team. Because of his wartime injury, Junek had trouble shifting gears, and so Eliska, then the riding mechanic, took over. In those days, it was common for a driver to have a riding mechanic to take care of the mechanical things while he focused on racing. They bought a state-of-the-art Mercedes and, in the autumn of 1922, an Italian-made Bugatti Type 30, a cigar-shaped racer which Junek gave his wife after a tough win in 1923. It would become Eliska's trademark. Ettore Bugatti grew up in a household of artists, surrounded by poets, painters, sculptors, and architects. He took this rich artistic heritage and melded it with his love for the automobile to create a legendary mark. At his peak, the Bugatti not only produced the most luxurious, sought-after and expensive cars on Earth, but also a series of racers that defeated all comers. According to the book The Amazing Bugattis, in April 1924, Ettore wrote to his friend and faithful customer Junek in Prague, sending him the sketch of what the 1924 car was to look like. "Springs and so on are completely within the bodyworks," he wrote. "The under part of the car is completely straight, only the cooling ribs project through. The front axle is a mechanical masterpiece. It is a hollow axle of quite new construction." Bugatti later explained that he had abandoned the thick aerofoil body used on the tank cars in spite of its technical advantages, simply with the object of obtaining a more elegant shape to facilitate sales. The Bugatti race cars were some of the most beautiful cars ever built, but suffered from inadequate brakes. After being criticized over the design of his brakes, Ettore Bugatti reportedly said, "I build my cars to go, not stop." The flamboyant Italian also became a lifelong friend to Eliska and mourned with her when she lost her husband. Remember, another Bugatti mantra was that, in geometry and morality, the shortest path is a straight line. They were more than mere clients to him, and they only raced Bugattis, something he also appreciated. Eliska's first professional race was in 1923 at Junek's side. The following year, she took the wheel herself and at Lakotin-Trezmozna in Czechoslovakia won in the category of touring cars. Overnight, she became a national celebrity. Suddenly, people were paying attention to the smiling woman in the Bugatti, curious to see what she was capable of. Eliska placed first in the 1925 at Zbraslav Joloviste. There, she was able to achieve on a Bugatti T30 something incredible. She set a new record for the category, defeated not only her husband with a stronger Type 35, but she has become probably the first woman in the world, the absolute winner of the international automobile race. The Juneks bought a second Bugatti to celebrate, but also because that year riding mechanics were banned on the big-name European circuits as they had been in America, and the couple had to race separately. In her memories, she remembers that once her husband bought her a dress in Paris as a reward for winning a race. In an interview she laughed, "A supreme sacrifice for a man to go to the dressmaker." By 1926, Eliska Junkova had exceeded her husband's skill level and was good enough to compete in races throughout Europe against the best male drivers of the time. The glamorous Juneks were often in the society pages of a young Czechoslovakia looking for national heroes. This 1926 magazine dispatch was typical of the adulation they received. What a beautiful sporting couple! Junek and his wife, his dedicated and excited pupil, in whose slim body is beating the heart of a brave man and whose childlike hands drive her car with unmistakable security and a great speed through tight curves. Also in 1926, Eliska took second place in her class at Klausenpass in Switzerland and 11th overall. She was easily identifiable for always racing in blue skirt, white blouse, leather helmet and goggles. Klausenpass was considered the most difficult hill climb, and it was also the first start abroad for Elizabeth. Although it was early August, there was plenty of rain and even some snow showers. The 21.5 kilometers track had a 1,273 meters difference in altitude from start to finish, the finish line itself being at almost 2,000 meters. When Elizabeth started her run, a tropical downpour was raging in the lowest points. There was fog in the middle and 6 centimeters of fresh snow at the top. Rudolf Caracciola finished in 20 minutes 50 seconds in a supercharged Works Mercedes. Elizabeth, in a naturally aspirated 2-liter sports Bugatti, was 20 seconds faster. That same year, she ran the Brno Sobazice hill climb, broke all course records of the time despite the bad weather, and won absolutely. In 1927, it was a remarkable success at the Targa Florio in Sicily, an exceptionally demanding course. She was driving a 2.3-liter Bugatti Type 35B with her husband as accompanying mechanic passenger. She spent a month in Sicily before the event, carefully noting the 1,500 corners of the 67-mile-long course. She would note any hazards with white chalk marks on the rocks, pavements and building edges. The man mocked her because the Targa was a race that required extraordinary stamina. That year, the race was 5 laps of the 108-kilometer circuit for a total of 540 kilometers. Furthermore, it meant to get from the sea level to a height of about 900 meters, sometimes above steep cliffs. But Eliska was a gifted technical driver who used her memory more than her physical strength. She is credited for being one of the first drivers to walk around the course before an event, noting landmarks and checking out the best line through the corners. She started a trend of creating a physical memory of the route. In 1927, this was most unique. Eliska completed the route 50 times already at the training, and at the downhill she had bigger balls than Junek and was even faster than him. Her preparation paid off. With a strong start at the end of the first lap, her elapsed time of 1 hour 27 minutes placed her fourth, just 10 seconds behind the works Bugatti of Emilio Materassi, and ahead of the works Maserati and Peugeot. It remains a mystery how 2 boulders appeared in her way on the 5th round of the kilometer 38 of the track. Her steering failed and she crashed into a ditch along the rough and muddy course, only narrowly escaping a fall off a cliff. Fortunately, neither was injured, and they were picked up and brought back to the start line pits by fellow driver Saverio Candrilli. This performance gathered great respect from her contemporary drivers and the spectators alike. Of course, the main feature of Madame Junek was the elegant and clean driving style to compensate the lack of physical strength. She won the Brno Sobesice hill climb again in 1927 on adverse weather. And on she went to the German Grand Prix at the newly opened Nurburgring, where she secured a victory in the 2-liter class that set her in the record books as the first woman to ever win a Grand Prix, and at one of the world's most renowned tracks as well. While many other female racers of the era were encountering resistance, Junek was well loved by almost everyone. Anyway, a congratulatory embrace by the husky overall winner of the event, the German Otto Merz, left her with 2 broken ribs. And her fame spread throughout Europe. Eliska anglicized her name, therefore became known in Europe as Elizabeth Junek and Eliska Junkova in Czechoslovakia. The racing press dubbed her the Queen of the Steering Wheel. The following year, that delicate, courageous little woman, as the Mercedes-Benz racing director Alfred Neubauer called her, was determined to make an all-out attempt to win the Targa Florio, or at least the Ladies' Cup, driving a new Bugatti Type 35B, chassis 4868, along the grueling 108-kilometer, 67-mile Madoni Circuito Medio. Remember that this was the most difficult and dangerous track of the time, and this light car was nimble but uncomfortable to drive due to its rigid axles. It didn't make for an easy drive through the Sicilian mountains. Race organizer Count Vincenzo Florio arranged for Vincenzo Gargotta, one of his press officers and a local resident, to accompany Miss Bugatti, as the locals dubbed her, on sighting laps around the course. Periodically she would stop to put chalk marks on posts, walls and trees along the route, This time, 12 other drivers had practicing days before the race start, and Connelly, Materassi along with Tazio Nuvolari all practiced the course, following Junek's idea of reconnaissance. To me, this is the best performance ever by a lady racer, and this is its full story. This year there was a strong field of works entries from Bugatti, Maserati and Alfa Romeo. On race day, the cars were flagged off at 2-minute intervals, with Junkova starting well into the second half of the grid, coincidentally just ahead of Kandrilli again. She started 2 minutes behind the great Albert Divo in the same type of Bugatti, and her performance in the actual race proved to be a sensation. The fastest car on the first lap was Louis Chiron in his works Bugatti, followed by Giuseppe Campari in an Alfa Romeo and Chiron's teammate Albert Divo. At the end of the first lap she was lying fourth, barely 30 seconds behind Chiron, showing her skill and the value of her meticulous preparation. On the second lap, Chiron pushed too hard and went off. Divo had pitted, and this put Junkova into the overall lead, having passed many of the 20 cars that had started ahead of her, and she had an advantage of 20 seconds over Giuseppe Campari's Alfa Romeo 6C and Albert Divo works Bugatti. At one point she even passed Divo and held an amazing 2-minute lead over him and Chiron, Dreyfus, Nuvolari, Campari and Materassi behind him. Amazing. Meanwhile, Campari pushed very hard to take the lead by the end of the third lap after 4.5 hours. Autocar magazine reported that, and I quote, "Still more thrilling was the struggle between Madame Junek and Divo for 270 miles, 435 kilometers. There was never more than a mile between the two cars, and for 3/4 of the distance, one was right on the heels of the other." End quote. She dropped back to second place on the fourth lap, being overtaken by Campari when a defective brake caused her to hit a curb in Colesano, but she didn't give up. Going into the final lap, Junkova was still in second and had closed to within a minute, although she had to change tires and refuel at the Polizzi depot. Divo was now only 10 seconds back on elapsed time. Unfortunately, in the last half of the fifth and last lap, she had suffered a puncture, losing 2 vital minutes while her husband, as mechanic, changed the tire. The stop also overheated the engine, the water pump developed a leak, and that meant the loss of radiator water, so she had to slow down until she could top up the radiator. Divo took the lead on the last lap and won the Targa Florio. At the end of a more than 7 hours race, Eliska Junkova finished fifth, nursing a sick car, only 9 minutes behind the winner Divo, Campari and the Bugattis of Connelly and Chiron, winning the Ladies' Cup. Had the car held up, she might have won the entire event. Madame Junek also turned the second lap fastest time. Her fame spread throughout Europe. Remember that, by finishing fifth, she did beat 25 other top drivers, including the likes of Luigi Fagioli, René Dreyfus, Ernesto Maserati and Tazio Nuvolari. In his book, My Two Lives, Dreyfus says, and I quote, "Her tenacity and determination were remarkable. For this event, she traveled to Sicily with a governess and a car like the one in which she would compete. A full month before the race. She began slowly, 1 lap one day, 2 laps the next, and so on. She must have put up 30 or 40 laps in that car. She knew the course better than anybody. She really pounded her Bugatti. It was a very used car by race day. But she had thought ahead, of course, and the Bugatti team arrived with the new car she had ordered, a T35B, painted black and yellow, and arranged to have it delivered to the course. She was ready with her plan. In the early laps of the race, she started to scare the wits out of the other drivers. Being beaten by a woman was unthinkable then, and she was up with the leaders until the final lap. What she hadn't considered in all her carefully pre-race calculations, and what she couldn't have foreseen, was that mechanical problems might interfere with her plan. And they did. She was forced to drop back. Still, she finished 5th. A terrific showing. Nobody who was in that Targa ever forgot that formidable lady. End quote. Vincenzo Florio warmly congratulated her at the finish and, begging Devo's pardon, called her the moral victor of the day. In July that year, at the Grand Prix in Germany, a 18-lap race over the 28 kilometers long Nurburgring, she was sharing the driving with her husband. She had just changed places with Junek when the car went off the road and turned over after hitting a rock. Junek was thrown out of the car and was killed almost instantly of head injuries. Eliska was heartbroken and entirely disillusioned with racing. She had no idea what to do with her life. Her entire world had vanished before her eyes. Thankfully, Ettore Bugatti was right by her side throughout it all, and it was Ettore who helped Eliska learn to live again. Absolutely devastated, Eliska sold off their cars and gave up racing. For the obvious psychological reasons, which certainly played a role with the financial demands on the professional sport. The income dried up and, in addition, the world economic crisis started. Instead, Eliska returned to travel, her first love before Junek and racing. She set out for Ceylon, and Ettore Bugatti himself gave Eliska a flashy new touring car for the journey, a Type 44, and hired her to seek out export opportunities to the subcontinent. Ettore Bugatti really had a weakness for the young couple, and not only because they were prospective customers. She never competed at the Brno Grand Prix, the longest circuit used in Grand Prix racing in the 30s, but she helped as an organizer to design the Masaryk circuit in Brno, and using the influence that came with her name, she helped to convince the best European drivers, such as Louis Chiron, Luigi Fagioli, and Tazio Nuvolari, to compete there. Since the mid-1930s, Eliska Junkova worked in the management of the sales department of the Bata Tires company, and she remained in the industry until her retirement. During the Second World War, she was involved in the domestic resistance movement, and in the Prague Uprising in May 1945, she made her flat available to the Czechoslovak military command as an observation point. Post-war, Elizabeth Junek continued to work in the tire industry. After the merger of the Bata, Ruben-Anacod and Matador companies, she created the Baron brand and kept the stylized Bata font, which Baron uses to this day. Eliska did find love again and remarried shortly after the Second World War. But from 1948 to 1964, the communist authorities, disapproving of the high-flying, bourgeois lifestyle that Elizabeth Junek had lived, refused to allow her to travel abroad. Stuck firmly behind the Iron Curtain, her accomplishments were largely forgotten by a motorsports world that had turned their attention to women like Kay Petrie. There were a few exceptions, though. She was allowed to go abroad in 1966 when she attended at the Memorial Route on Targa Florio. They gave her the prize of the best ever. The Italians really loved her. In 1969, she appeared in England at the 40th anniversary of the Bugatti Owners Club of Britain. 20 years later, at the age of 89, she attended a Bugatti meeting in the United States as the guest of honor. In 1972, she published her autobiography entitled My Memory is Bugatti. Eliska Yunkova proved to young women of her era that if she could race, then so could they. It's impossible to say exactly how many young girls might have been influenced by Yunkova's success, but she recognized that she had proven that women were just as capable of competing alongside men, an important feat for a woman of the jazz age. But the unflappable tiny woman lived well into her 90s, long enough for the Iron Curtain to fall and to die in freedom. Eliska Yunkova died peacefully in January 1994. She was laid to rest in the Vinohradsky Herbitrov in Prague, where also her first husband, Junek, is also buried. But her spirit lives in Czech composer Jaroslav Ježek's 1928 jazz classic Bugatti Steppe. You are listening to it. Thanks to the Juneks, more than 150 Bugattis were imported to Czechoslovakia, being the couple responsible for 20 cars, among them 8 Type 35. Of her own accomplishments, Eliska wrote in her memoirs, I have proved that a woman can work her way to the same level as the best man in my field. But that is not so significant. What is important is the proof that she can develop according to her own natural feminine qualities and abilities. We are too inclined to explain our failures by complaining about nature. It is more useful to grumble less and train more. Then we see that many handicaps can, in fact, be surpassed. Elizabeth Junek. And this is it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like, share it with your friends, leave a line in the comments section if you have something to say or ask, and subscribe for more videos like this. I see you in the next video. Take care